When you've turned to number 834, if you would turn your Bibles to Exodus chapter 18. Exodus chapter 18. We're going to begin there this evening. About 5 or 6 weeks ago, we were studying this in Sam's class. No, told him I'd joke with him on that because of what he said this morning. Yeah, it wasn't that long ago, but in Exodus 18. We studied where Jethro, the priest of Midian, but also Moses' father-in-law, is bringing his wife and their 2 sons, whom Moses had entrusted in the safekeeping of Jethro while he went back to face the Pharaoh and to bring the people out, that Jethro met him. And they greeted each other, as is common in that way, very warmly. They talked with each other of their welfare. Then they went in the tent. And Moses told his father-in-law all that the Lord had done to Pharaoh and the Egyptians for Israel's sake. And that's in verse 8 of Exodus chapter 18. Jethro, verse 9, rejoiced for all the good that the Lord had done to Israel, in that he had delivered them out of the hand of the Egyptians. Then Jethro said, "Blessed be the Lord, who has delivered you out of the hand of the Egyptians and out of the hand of Pharaoh, and has delivered the people from under the hand of the Egyptians. Now I know that the Lord is greater than all gods, because in this affair they dealt arrogantly with the people," they there being the Egyptians. And Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, brought a burnt offering and sacrifices to God, and Aaron came with all the elders of Israel to eat bread with Moses' father-in-law before God. And so there's this wonderful exchange here. Jethro, remember, is a priest of Midian, as we talked about in today's class, that there were different priests throughout the nations, and particularly those associated geographically close to Israel. And there's indications also later on where in the New Testament of God dealing with the nations and how he dealt with them as opposed to his special people, Israel. And so we have ones like Melchizedek and Jethro. We have Balaam, who is a priest. And usually you can infer that they are in some way a priest in relation to Jehovah, as long as they're not referred to as the priest of Baal or Baal, or with the Asherahs or Molech or one of the other gods. And so we see with Jethro here already a reverence for God, and certainly in the understanding of the situation with Moses and the people. But one thing that really stood out to me when we were going through this in the class is in verse 11, is this "now I know." This phrase, "now I know." And why that stood out to me is because it instantly took me back to another part of Scripture. And then I found this is actually something that is said a few times. And I want to look at this phrase. It's not overly used, but it's very important here. So we see here Jethro has this knowledge of God, and he knows of the greatness of God, but because of the way God proved himself in delivering the Israelites through a mighty hand, through the plagues, through going through the Red Sea, through the defeat of the Egyptian army, his care in bringing them to the land, that Jethro says, there is something that I know now on a deeper level and in a different way than I realized before. And most often when that phrase is used, it is used in that sense, that there has been a change or a transcendence, some way that knowledge is deeper, or there's something stronger about that. Interestingly, before this, and this was the phrase where when we read it, it jumped in my mind, is back in Genesis chapter 22. In Genesis chapter 22, the story of Abraham being commanded to offer Isaac, and where Abraham went early in the morning at the instruction of God to offer his son as a burnt offering in the land of Moriah. So many things we could talk about in this, but we're not going to be able to. He rose in the morning, and then he went. He took the wood of the burnt offering, laid it on his son Isaac in verse 6, took his hand, the fire, and the knife, and so went both of them together. Isaac said to his father, "My father," he said, "Here I am, my son. Behold the fire and the wood, but where's the lamb for the burnt offering?" And Abraham said, "God will provide himself the lamb for a burnt offering, my son." It's interesting. He kind of answered his question in that. He will provide a lamb, my son. It's really kind of allowing for both. They came to the place where God had told him. Abraham built the altar, he laid the wood, he bound Isaac his son, laid him on the altar on the top of the wood. Abraham reached out his hand, took the knife to slaughter his son, but the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, "Abraham, Abraham." And he said, here I am. He said, "Do not lay your hand on the boy or do anything to him. For now I know that you fear God and you have not withheld your son, your only son, for me." It's interesting, in this time, it is said of God, who knows all things, who knows the heart of man, who knows the intent of man. And God is the one who expresses that when you were the knife up, ready to come down to fulfill this command, I know that there is nothing that you would withhold from me. And you think about the things that we understand about Abraham's faith so far, God calling him from his people to go into a land. He said, "I will show you an unfamiliar land," to live as a stranger in that land, and then promises being given, many of which he would not see the fulfillment in his time. And all along the step of the way, we see something change in Abraham. And I think God saying, "Now I know," is also a message to Abraham, of Abraham having this recognition that there's not anything that he would withhold from God. Because every step of the way, Abraham could have stopped what he was doing. And it's, I have a feeling when he called out Abraham, God, Abraham was just hoping God would say something, somehow stop. He's fully focused on that. You want that stay of execution. You want the phone from the governor to ring to stop the execution. He says, "Now I know." There was this willingness to offer his beloved only son that marked a difference in the depth of knowledge about what Abraham was willing to do in his faith. It can be a false hope. One, just to mention, in Judges chapter 13, there's a man named Micah, not the prophet Micah that we know about later, who, when Israel is living in a degenerate condition, he ends up getting this Levite for a priest to live in his house. He has some wealth and he has an ephod made and all that stuff. And he says, "Now I know that everything's going to be well with me because I have a Levite for a priest." Well, that's a superstitious "I know," and that didn't prove well, because the people of the tribe of Dan, who also had an idolatrous background, from the idols to God in Dan and Beersheba, they end up taking his priest. Doesn't really help them much either. But you can have a false sense of security, but very quickly that proved to be worth nothing. And so what we're talking about, this "now I know," is that there's something profound and something that happens that really changes the level of appreciation, typically for the believer, in their understanding of God and their relationship with God. 1 Kings chapter 17. In 1 Kings chapter 17, there is the widow of Zarephath, who is praised not only here, but also in the New Testament, the book of Luke as well. And as Elijah has predicted a drought throughout the land, Ahab is trying to kill him. He's hunting him all over the place. And so Elijah is staying pretty much out of the main part of the land of Israel. And he's up in Zarephath. And he says, there's a widow I've commanded to feed you. Not that he's literally given a command. There's a widow that he knows is going to take care of Elijah. And so he came to her, and he made the provision for her. You know, they were suffering from the drought, and there's a great act of faith that she has where she says that she's gathering sticks. She has just a little bit of barley, you know, a little bit of meal for some cake and water. And basically, Elijah the priest says, I want you to make me a cake to eat. He says, well, we really don't have much. I'm making this so basically my son and I can have a final meal and then die. And you think Elijah's completely cool. He goes, okay, well, that's nice. Well, make me one first. And then you say, okay, Elijah's pretty cold-hearted. No. This is a way of helping her in developing her faith. After he says that in verse 13, the Lord God, the Lord of Israel, says, the jar of flour shall not be spent, and the jug of oil shall not be empty until the day that the Lord sends rain on the earth. And so she did as Elijah said, and she and her household ate for many days. So there's already this continual daily miracle that's taking place in her household. She already has an appreciation for God. In fact, the fact that she's not of the people of Israel and God is taking care of her is the point that Jesus makes in Luke when he praises the widow of Zarephath. But starting in verse 17, this woman's son became ill, and the illness was so severe that no breath was left within him. And she is crying out in distress and says, what have you against me, O man of God, to bring my sin to remembrance and cause the death of my son? We don't know what sin she has in her mind that she thinks that the death of her son is the result of something that she had done. But he really pushes that aside and says, give me your son. And he stretched his arms out on him. He laid him on his bed. He stretched on him, and he cries out to God and stretched himself on the child, and the child's life came to him again. And he brought the life back into the child. And the woman said to Elijah, now I know that you are a man of God, and that the word of the Lord is in your mouth is truth. So she's had this faith in God. She's had this hope in God that's been realized through daily care. And yet now, through this resurrection of her son from the dead, there is a depth to her appreciation, not only of God, but of his messenger, Elijah. Now I know that the words that you say are true. We see this in Martha's relationship to Jesus when Lazarus dies and Martha meets him. Yes, I know he's dead. I know he's in the ground, but now I know also that even now, if you ask for something, God will give it to you. There's a little bit of a different slant on that in Psalm 20 and verse 6, and this is the last one I really kind of want to look at as far as the particulars of the use of this phrase. In Psalm chapter 20, there's this sense of the trust in the relationship of God. And this is in a section of Psalms that really talk about the praise of God's care, a Psalm of David. It says in verse 1, may the Lord answer you in the day of trouble. May the name of the God of Jacob protect you. May he send help from the sanctuary and give you support from Zion. May he remember all your offerings and regard with favor your burnt sacrifices. May he grant you your heart's desire and fulfill all your plans. May we shout with joy over your salvation in the name of our God set up as our banners. May the Lord fulfill all your petitions. Now I know that the Lord saves his anointed. He will answer from his holy heaven with the saving might of his right hand. Some trust in chariots, some in horses, but we trust in the name of the Lord our God. They collapse and fall, but we rise and stand upright. O Lord, save the king. May he answer us when we call. So here's the David, the king, the anointed, and he's saying, now I know that the Lord saves his anointed. Well, what taught David that? Well, with David, in contrast to some of these ones that we saw where there was a particular moment of truth, so to speak, a particular tension situation in which God proved himself, for David, it was over a period of time. From the time that he was anointed and not yet serving as king, where he showed his faith and his bravery in going after Goliath, and then having to be on the run from Saul and having an opportunity to kill Saul, but realizing that he should not kill the Lord's anointed, so he didn't. He waited for things in God's time. And then as things continued on, and then he ascended the throne, and God's care for him throughout that time of his reign. So sometimes this now I know change in our thinking may not be because of one particular thing in our life, but maybe many things over the course of our life just reinforce it, just prove it that God is dependable, that we have that deeper knowledge, we have that deeper confidence. So we really see a pattern here where there is I would say I know. I have faith. I have hope. I have knowledge. And there's nothing wrong at all. In fact, we all start there. And we may be there for a long time. And that is perfectly pleasing in the sight of God to live with that level of faith of knowing that and trusting in God. Trusting him for our daily bread, trusting him for our care, going to him in prayer, being faithful in our service to God, doing the type of things that we know that we ought to do to be pleasing to God. That is where we start, and having that faith and having that hope and having that trust and that confidence that we know that God is going to be there for us. And it kind of reminds me of like when a man and a woman get married. You know, you make that commitment to one another, and I know intellectually that you're going to be there for me and I'm going to be there for you. We're making that commitment together. Because of the time that we've spent together and the things I know about you, that we're willing to make this commitment. I know that we're going to do this. But sometimes there may be an event or a period of time in that marriage that becomes a great trial, or it may be over the course of the period of time in that relationship and how things go, that there's some type of transition to where it goes from I know to now I know. That perhaps, okay, I always know, my wife would be for me there in a time of difficulty. But maybe this particular time of difficulty comes and other people are scattering or whatever, and she stands by me and she's with me through it. Now I know that I can depend on her. Or maybe it's a sickness. Maybe it is through some type of trial. Maybe I'll lose a job or whatever. And she's there with me. She's encouraged. So I always knew that she would be there because I always knew. I mean, that's why we did this. But now I know. Or maybe it's with the church. I know my brethren are going to be there for me in a time of need. I know that they're going to be there if I need anything, that I can call any of them at any time day or night, and they'll be there to help. Intellectually, I know that. But maybe something happens in my life, something unimagined. And the way I see my brethren rally around me, it's like, whoa, now I know. The facts didn't change. The depth of the way that I knew that information did, that confidence that I know. It may be that I don't go through that kind of thing, but it might be that over the course of time of being a member of the congregation for that long and seeing how we respond to other people and different things, that now I know, because I've seen it happen so many times. I know that if it happens to me, it's not going to be any different. And so this idea that we have faith and we have hope and we have confidence, we have this knowledge, but it might be a point of trial. It may be, sometimes we talk about the crucible where everything comes through, and it's either going to make us or break us, as we often say. Or it may be that over the course of time, and as I have reflection, I go, now I know. I really have a deep confidence in God's providence, just because all I can do is look back on my life and see it every step of the way. And maybe in the lives of my loved ones. Now I know. I have a deeper knowledge. I have a deeper confidence. I have a deeper faith. I have a deeper hope because of either in what has endured over the long run or whatever endured at that point of greatest stress. And it actually might be that at that point of greatest stress, I might have failed. It might be that over part of that period of time, I might have failed, and the now I know comes from the consequences of my actions. Well, you know what? That wasn't really the right way to go. I mean, how many people that I know, and I know that a lot of times the way they wake up to their faith is because of so much of their life that has been spent in the darkness. Now I know that I should have been following this way. In fact, we see that in one of the Proverbs, the exhortation of the father to the young man is to be faithful to God, embrace wisdom, put it around your neck, live by it, let her be your closest ally and friend, and hold on to it, lest you waste your body and waste your life and your possessions and everything in sin, and at the very end then you say, how I should have listened to my teachers, how I should have listened. And there's sometimes people can come out of that and have a deep conviction of God because they've seen how bad it is without him. They know what is the right path. We look at these the situations when we think about maybe particular situations that come up. That God very often used events as a refining power. In Isaiah chapter 48, as God is trying to call the people to holiness. They're proclaiming that they're holy, but they're not. He gets to a point, he says, verse 9, for my name's sake, I defer my anger. For the sake of my praise, I restrain it for you, that I may not cut you off. Behold, I have refined you, but not as silver. I have tried you in the furnace of affliction for my own sake. For my own sake I do it. For how should my name be profaned? My glory I will not give to another. I chose you to glorify my name in, people of Israel. And so ultimately, my refining of you is for my glory. I'm not going to cast you off, but I've got to clean you up. And the idea of the refiner is that of particularly in this case, of the melting of gold, where you bring it to a high temperature, it becomes a liquid, and then the bad stuff floats to the top, and then you have a cup or something that you scoop off the part that is that doesn't belong. That's not gold. You take off the dross of the silver. You take off the impurities, so that when it cools back down, the gold is purified. But it has to go through the fire, and that's what he's saying with here. I am doing it for my name's sake. In Daniel chapter 11, we see that refining in a slightly different sense. We talked about this in my class, going over the captivity and the return, where Daniel chapter 11 and 12 is talking about things that take place mainly in between the Old and New Testaments. And one of the things that mentions happens in 11, starting in about 33. And the wise among the people shall make many understand, though for some days they shall stumble by sword and flame, captivity and plunder. And so here the situation he's describing prophetically is that the government forces are coming against the people of God. And at that time, there were some people who stood up in rebellion against it, because they were trying to make the Jews do profane sacrifices, not sacrifice to God at all, were just being tyrants. And there were some faithful people who said no, and they fought back against it and instigated a rebellion against that. And that's the wise. But and as they rose up, there were some people who, out of the desire for fame and glory, wanted to join in with the rebellion, wanted to join in with the fight. But what happened was, there were some who stumbled by sword and flame, captivity and plunder. When they stumble, they shall receive a little help. Many shall join themselves with flattery. These are the ones who come through because they want to build a reputation. They want to build a name for themselves. And some of the wise shall stumble, so that they may be refined, purified, made white until the time of the end, where it still waits for the appointed time. And what he's saying here, there's some people who came through for false reasons, and God was going to allow some of the ones who were true blue, the ones who were faithful to God, and that those who were the pretenders would know that, no, these people are faithful to God. They're here for the right reasons. And God allowed some of them to fall, and it made some of those who joined to him think, wait a minute, maybe we shouldn't be joining this rebellion. Maybe this is not going to be something that succeeds. God used the righteous falling in this case to refine them, to get rid of the people who were following for the wrong reasons, and to preserve the people who were fighting for the right reasons. And so that refining process, a lot of times it's getting rid of a lot of the impurities. It also happens in chapter 12 and verse 10, some of the things that they would endure, that many shall purify themselves, make themselves white, and be refined. That is, they were going to go through some tribulation as far as the purification. You can go through Jeremiah and Zechariah and Malachi chapter 3 and verse 3, where he talks about God saying, I'm refining you to purify you. And in this case, that refining was through persecution. And so there was a point of contention where they would go through and find out, well, what is my faith made of? And we see that idea brought forth in 1 Peter chapter 1. 1 Peter chapter 1, starting in verse 6. 1 Peter chapter 1, starting in verse 6. He's talking here to Christians who have this, in verse 4, an inheritance that is imperishable, undefiled, unfading, kept in heaven for you, who are kept by the power of God, guarded through faith for salvation. Verse 6, in this you rejoice. You rejoice in your salvation. You rejoice in this hope. Though now for a little while, if necessary, you have been grieved by various trials, so that the tested genuineness of your faith, more precious than gold that perishes, though it is tested by fire, may be found to result in praise and glory and honor at the revelation of Jesus Christ. He says, even though you're faithful and you have this home promised, there's still area for refinement. There is still area to have your faith purified, to test the genuineness. Is this a faith that's going to hold up in the moment of stress or over the time of stress? Will it endure and will it hold up? We find this with the apostles. Just one last thing on here. If you think about what we said before, you have faith and hope. But now you go through these various trials. You go through this period of being refined. Now you can be in this period of, now I know that I've got a faith that will withstand, that I've got a faith that will be upheld in my time of difficulty. And it may be, too, that places in our mind, one of my sisters and I were talking about that this week, that you think about some of the uncertainty of things in life, in the future, particularly when you're young, and yet you get to a point in life and you see a lot of the things that you went through, and a lot of the things that you endured, and you say, I got through that. Some of the things that were not imaginable. Some of the things that maybe you could imagine, but you dreaded. But it happened. And by faith in God, the help of my brethren, help of family and all, I got through that. I endured that. And it gives you that confidence that, well, I guess if certain other things can happen in the future that may be unfathomable, unimaginable, undesirable, I can get through those things too. I still have God, still got my church family, I've still got my family to get through those things. One last one I want to look at is the apostles. You think about the apostles, and go to Acts chapter 4. We've been making a lot of good points out of Acts 4 in the last several lessons through various teachers. Think about the apostles being with Jesus. They certainly had faith. They certainly had hope. We often talk about a lot of the confusion that they had about exactly what Jesus may or may not be doing or how he's going to do it. But we certainly see a confidence that they have in Jesus. In fact, at one point, they're saying, hey, we're willing to die for you. We're willing to go and die with you. And we know that when it came to that point, they fled, and Peter denied the Lord. But what was the refining action? What was that great test of the trial? Well, they saw Jesus crucified. Then they saw the glory of his resurrection. And the apostles after that were completely transformed. They were a now I know. So there was things they intellectually knew before, but there were things that they knew deeply. They had a deeper knowledge. They had a deeper confidence, a deeper faith, a deeper hope because of what happened. We find here in Acts chapter 4, you remember before his crucifixion, they were sometimes very fearful of the leaders of Israel. Now they're brought before them and they're saying things like, well, we ought to obey God rather than men. There we see all kind of confidence. And we see after they healed the lame man, and they're brought to basically give an account for that, they make their testimony. Verse 12, salvation is in no one else, for there's no other name under heaven given among men by which we must be saved. Now, when they saw the boldness of Peter and John and perceived or recognized that they were uneducated common men, they were astonished. And they recognized, this is that same idea there, and perceived, they recognized that they had been with Jesus. The difference between Peter and John here and Peter and John in the Gospels, the end of the Gospels, is that crucifixion and the resurrection. And what they knew and what they now knew. This idea of recognized means that they became fully acquainted with. They understood completely what it meant. They had a deeper faith. Now they really were willing to die for him. And, with the exception of John, it appears that they did die for him. One of the things that we find, sometimes it takes the deepest, gloomiest darkness to open our eyes to see the light. Sometimes we have to travel through the deepest valley before we can reach the highest heights. It might be in our life we come to a moment of truth. We come to a point where it is obvious that the decision I'm making now is going to put my life one way or the other. Or there is something that is come upon me in my life that I've got to deal with, that how I go through this is really going to kind of set the tone for a lot of things in my life. Not that it's not unchangeable, but how I deal with it has an opportunity to deepen my faith, to deepen my trust and my knowledge and my confidence and my closeness with God, or to drive a wedge. My kids quote back to me all the time. Even Frankie and Debbie's kids quote some of my quotes to me. The old, the best time to plant a tree 20 years ago, the next best time is now. When we were planting trees at RHR, Sam made sure to point, hey, you should have done this 20 years ago. I was like, yeah, thank you. But my other one for the kids is that things that come up in your life, challenges that come up in your life, particularly challenges your faith. And it didn't originate with me. I heard it, but it locked in. Things that are going to happen are going to make you bitter or better. I've known people who have gone through certain things and they have bitterness in their life towards their brethren or former brethren. They have bitterness in their life towards God and to, anything that they can lay the blame on. Other people who go through the exact same type of circumstances and have a deep faith in God, a deep appreciation for the people of God, went through the same thing. Some people come out bitter, and some people come out better as a result. In the Wednesday night invitation a while back, I talked about the Japanese practice of, if they break a dish or they break a cup and they want to repair it, and in our country, we'll try to find the glue and stuff. We try to get the pieces just right so that, it doesn't look like it's broken. Try to get everything to where it matches all the other cups. And they don't do that. What they do, if you remember, I'm not going to say you have to remember anything from an invitation, but what they do is they'll take the mixture that they're going to use to repair it, and they'll mix in gold or they'll mix in silver. Usually it's gold, something very precious, and they'll repair that crack. And so when you see that cup, it's got this big gold crack right through it. Still can use it as a cup, still goes with the rest, but it's got that big gold crack on there. That place of the break has been healed and it's stronger. And yet, when we think about it in our life, sometimes it's because of that place of the break that we actually became stronger than we would have been without the break. Yes, we would prefer to not have the break. We would prefer not to have the great trial in our life. We would not prefer not to have something bad that happened to us. But if we allowed it to be something that deepened our faith and our trust and our confidence in God, in our reliance on Him to help us make sense of it and to heal and to get past, we find God in that gold of the break. The place of the healing is where I see God, not letting me be fall apart, worthless, cast off into the heat. But that's where He healed me. And that's where He restored me. And that's where He made me strong. And so, yes, I'll have gold in the break. Because in that you can see God. Because now I know that God is the one who heals. Now I know God is my strength, my present help in a time of weakness. Now I know that I have a home that waits for me. Now I know that His promises are true. Appreciate your attention to the lesson, the things that we've talked about. I ask you to turn your songbook, the Song of Invitation. This is what power is. It's in the blood of Jesus Christ. Through being able to be baptized, so our sins can be washed away, to have our sins forgiven as children of God, that we can have that healing, we can have that restoration, and have the strength of the life, however long God gives us, of being able to look every step of the way and see God's power and God's presence in it. We can help you